Last video isn't doing that well. I guess I should, talk about madameweb or something. Howdy everyone, 'tis I Niche, and if that little intro stinger didn't say it all, I'm only here because the algorithm wants me to be. Frankly, I see no reason not to pretend that I'm here to do anything but just bolster my channel up in the algorithm, because I recently started making videos on this page again, and I need to get my name out there. So, rather than juke you around with all this talk about how I was super excited about madameweb, or I wanted to see how much of a train wreck it was, I just thought I'd tell it to you straight. I'm here because everyone's talking about madameweb, and while I would much rather make videos like my recently released Sing Street video, I also need to do something to make sure that people can watch the videos I actually want to make. That's all to say that this video is going to be a lot simpler than the usual stuff I make, and it's also going to be unscripted. So apologies in advance if I'm a little rambly, but I saw this movie and I figured I may as well talk about it and just kind of share my thoughts on it in a hopefully well-spoken, non-disparaging way. So let's just get right into things.
This film and this story is different because it's really grounded in reality.
But let's get one thing straight before I actually dive into talking about the movie itself. I'm not here to make fun of you if you saw madameweb, and hell, if you thought it was actually a pretty good time, because honestly, I didn't, hate it that much. Okay, it wasn't good, but I also can't say that I wasted 2 hours on it either. And a lot of that has to do with me seeing it for free, thanks to, having AMC A-List and being able to catch it in IMAX. But yeah, it just kind of happened. When I walked out of the theater, I had this... I was really quick about it too, because I thought it was a funny comparison. But I was really quick to pull my notes app out on my phone as soon as I left the theater. And just scribble this down really quickly. And it was something to the effect of, madameweb is the Oracle from The Matrix meets elements from Star Wars The Last Jedi meets the Terminator. And on the way home, I was stuck in traffic and I was thinking to myself, I'm like, no, this is really what the movie is trying to go for. The ending to madameweb, without spoiling anything, does feel like a ripoff of the ending to The Matrix. And huge chunks of this movie borrow the basic structure of the Terminator. It's there. It's this person who knows about what's going to happen in the future, trying to protect somebody before they can do something to the person that's trying to kill them, because that thing knows what's going to happen. It's literally the Terminator. To avoid burying the lead, I'm just going to come out and say it from now. I honestly think madameweb could have been better if it just tried to scale back everything it was doing and zeroed in on that element. That chase movie element, that pseudo horror sort of side of things, which the movie does try to actually do. There are points in madameweb where you can tell that they were influenced by horror movies and what have you. And I won't say it's they're horrible jump scares or anything. It's nothing like that. But it tries to borrow from the horror playbook, and I feel like it could have just gone a bit further. In much the same way that The Terminator is more or less a slasher movie, if you think about it, it could have worked because those elements are in this movie also.
It's more of a suspenseful thriller. That man's trying to kill you, which is unique from anything you've seen in a superhero movie.
Okay, so yeah, I don't think this movie is terrible. It actually has some moments that I thought were pretty cool. A lot of the action choreography was honestly pretty interesting. There was some good camera work there. There's this whole chase sequence through a part of the city towards the end of the movie where it's actually surprisingly well done. That's all I'm going to say. I don't want to spoil anything. I thought it was surprisingly clever at points. It was interesting. There was a huge moment where, as a member of the audience, I actually just reveled in the action, and I was lost in it, and it worked. And the same could be said about most of the action sequences in this movie, except for the very last one, which I think was completely stupid. Really, of all of them, they botched probably the most important one, but whatever, it's fine. Who cares? Moving on. My biggest gripe with this movie is that the plot is complete gobbledygook. And what I mean by that is, it makes sense and you can kind of string together what's happening, and it's not hard to follow. They make sure it's not hard to follow because they love to dub in a bunch of like inane garbage in this movie that explains things that don't need to be explained. There's a scene where like Dakota Johnson's character, madameweb, whatever her character, I think it was Cassie. There's a scene where she's in her apartment and she's like looking through her mother's notebook, and it's definitely it probably is the scene where that famous line from the trailer comes from. It's like one of 2 or 3 places where it could have been included. And there's a lot of off-camera dialogue as well as on-camera dialogue of her reading the journal to herself and talking to a cat. And it's stuff like that. You can follow the movie super easily. And if you can't, they make sure that you can. Like they may as well just have had Dakota Johnson look at the camera at some points and go, this is the scene where I figure out A, B, C, D, you know, because it is that blatant at points. The story itself is gobbledygook. And its main problem is that it's trying to do way too much, and it's also trying to be very complicated about it. So one of like the quote unquote rules of storytelling that I kind of subscribe to and I believe in is that you either tell a simple story in a complex way or you tell a complicated story in a simple way. I don't remember where I heard this. It might have been from like some book I read in college. It may have been in some like class I took. It may have just been like a behind the scenes thing I heard, you know, in some DVD somewhere. But those are the 2 ways to tell a story that are probably, especially for like mainstream blockbuster filmmaking, probably the way to go. Simple story told in a complex way or a complex story told in a simple way. And madameweb tells a complicated story that takes place across like different timelines because, right, she can see the future and she can impact the future and works in elements of a mystery about her past. And then it's also like it takes place in like a bunch of different locations. So it's actually just like a complicated story. But then they tell it in a more complex way because there are all these dream sequences and all of these like, you know, like all these little things. And it muddies the point of the movie. At the end of the day, nobody cares about the story of a madameweb. You know, people are there because they like Spider-Man and because this is tangentially related to Spider-Man, which, sidebar, is a really dumb way to like run a business. Like Sony, people like Spider-Man, so just make more Spider-Man movies with Marvel. Don't give us like madameweb or Morbius or Kraven the Hunter or, I don't know, like probably a 10-episode Aunt May series for all we know. Give us Spider-Man. I feel like I shouldn't have to say this. This isn't like rocket science. People like Spider-Man. Make Spider-Man movies, you know? But because they've insisted on making a madameweb movie, which in itself feels like it's trying to set up this larger universe of Spider-Man movies, because every time Sony tries to make one of these things, they're always trying to like set up sequels that aren't guaranteed and probably won't happen. Yeah, we're just left with a movie that doesn't know what it wants to be or what it's doing. Like, are you trying to make a pseudo-horror take on Spider-Man? Because if so, that's actually kind of interesting and somewhat compelling. Sure, Ezekiel Stone, crappy Spider-Man as I'll call him, you know, he could be an evil Spider-Man. He has a kind of cool costume. There's some cool acrobatic stuff he does in the movie. Sure, it's interesting. I mean, you have a Spider-Man movie where Spider-Man's the bad guy and people are trying to stop him and they're just normal people. Okay, yeah, I'm into that. But at the same time, they're trying to make a madameweb movie where they're doing the origin story about a Spider-Man character that I don't even think Spider-Man fans really like. I'm not like super versed in comic books. Like I've read Spider-Man. I know who madameweb is because I watched the 90s animated series. But like, did anyone really want a madameweb movie? Or is it just like Sony trying to like use the IP? You know what I mean? So you have the horror movie angle, you have the superhero origin angle, and you also have the weird, oh my god, this is so weird. And it's a spoiler. It's borderline a spoiler. Skip ahead. I'll mark it right on the screen. You skip to this time code or whatever the hell. But you also have like the weird backdoor Peter Parker birth story stuff. Which, okay, why? Don't get me wrong, because I genuinely think Adam Scott was one of the best parts of this movie, because it's Ben Wyatt. I love me some Ben Wyatt, and he's he's fine. He actually does quite good with what he's given in the script and stuff as far as the material goes. But like, why? Why did we feel the need to jam-pack like 3 different angles into this movie when only one of them was compelling? I keep coming back to the whole like, oh, it's a chase movie. Just do the Terminator, but instead of Arnold Schwarzenegger driving through a police station, it's crappy Spider-Man attacking girls in a diner. You know? I have knowledge about the future. Someone is trying to kill you because of something you will do. Come with me if you want to live. On paper, that's actually like a pretty interesting idea for a movie. But what we got is a muddy, confusing mess that doesn't double down on any of its ideas. It's so afraid of like doing something interesting. And that's the other thing. The whole production was... I don't even know what I'm talking about. I'm so like, there was so much going on in the movie and so much that I wanted to talk about that it's literally just... It's gone in one ear and kind of come out the other. I've literally forgotten about most of the crap I wanted to talk about today. There are so many strange moments that you really can't explain other than like sheer incompetence, I think. For example, there's a scene where she's like resuscitated after falling in like, I think the Hudson or something. And Adam Scott's like looking at her and he's like, we have to get you to a hospital. You need to be checked out, blah, 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 like all this stuff. And she's like, no way. I got to go home. I got to catch American Idol. That wasn't even the line. It was like, I have to go home to catch the idol. And stuff like that is all over the movie. It's all over the movie in the sense that there's just awkward, stilted dialogue that nobody knows how to recite on camera. And it's all over the movie in the sense that for whatever reason, this movie really wants you to remember what 2003 was like. So there's a rumor that this movie was like supposed to take place in the 90s. And then at some point during its production, either while they were shooting it, after they finished a first cut or something, they decided it needs to actually take place in the early 2000s. So they like surgically added dialogue and references to material from 2003 to help create this illusion. One of them being that American Idol line, and the other being... it's so badly cropped in. It's like this shot of Beyonce's Crazy in Love that's just put on the side of a building as like a poster or a mural of some kind. Which is especially funny to me because like, one, okay, Beyonce had a big year in 2003. Crazy in Love is a great song. Okay, whatever. But Beyonce was famous in the 90s. Like... It's so stupid. They could have picked like the Strokes or something. And I would have seen the Strokes and it would have been like, oh, okay, yeah, the Strokes. They weren't around in the 90s. They're a distinctly early 2000s aughts band. But no, Beyonce, Crazy in Love. There was another scene where they did like a needle drop to Britney Spears' Toxic. And it's the same exact thing where it's like, okay, they picked something that was relevant in 2003. And in that case, it actually kind of works because there's like a thematic thread that like, oh, okay, Toxic, and a little bit later, yeah, okay, whatever. I don't know. I really do. I feel like I'm going back to what I was saying earlier, where everything about this movie is so like loaded with information that comes back later, but isn't handled well. Like it doesn't have time to marinate in the context of the film itself. So it all just sort of happens. So many moments in this movie just feel like, okay, we need to do this and we need to accomplish it in the laziest and quickest way ever.
He was in the Amazon with my mom when she was researching spiders right before she died.
All you have to know is that madameweb doesn't work. It's way too long and it doesn't earn its length. And though I did genuinely like a lot of the action in it, like I said, the diner sequence and this chase sequence I mentioned earlier are actually pretty awesome. It just doesn't work though. Like you can't expect like 2 or 3 action scenes to kind of justify your 2-hour-long movie. And that's the problem. It's 2 hours long and it feels like it's 2 hours long. It really drags. But at the same time, it's so loaded with junk that like even though it feels like it drags, there are way too many scenes and scenettes throughout it where nothing, it's so hard to, I can't even like fully explain it. Like words don't come close to describing how like disorienting parts of this movie were. What probably killed this movie, because I feel like if we could look at the original draft that was approved for this movie, like the script that Dakota Johnson and Adam Scott saw when they like signed on to be in this thing, I'm sure that we probably would have had a movie with like just like more of a beginning, a middle, and an end. But in its current form, so much has to happen for the story to progress that we don't get that. We never actually feel like we're being told a story. We're just like watching a bunch of things happen, you know? I think a movie that you could really compare this to is The Flash, right? The Ezra Miller vehicle from last year that like everybody hated. I think it's better than The Flash insofar that like the CG was better and the story was less convoluted, but it's very similar in that you have a company that has IP and they don't know what to do with said IP, but they do know that they want to do something.
Now! You're showing off. Maybe a little.
And they also know that it has to stand on its own, but that it also has to kind of be segueable into future projects, let's just say. So rather than playing it too safe and doing a superhero origin story, you're left with a movie that is trying to be ambitious, right? We have that whole slasher movie angle, but it doesn't want to scare people and it doesn't want to be like alienating to anybody. So it is an origin story too. It's a slasher movie, but it's also an origin movie. And at the same time, it has to be more familiar. Like, unfortunately, Madam Web isn't the Flash. So they have to put in characters we know from something. So there is this character we know who will remain nameless. And he is there, kind of, but it's not his movie. And it's the same thing with The Flash, isn't it? Like, oh, we have a Flash movie, but like we don't know if the Flash can sell tickets, so we're going to put Batman here. And just to be safe, we're going to put a second Batman and a third one. You know, while we're at it, let's also put a fourth one. And Superman. People love Superman. Let's put the most iconic Superman there, without his estate's permission, of course. Let's put Supergirl in there too while we're at it. And another Supergirl. But not the person who played Supergirl for the longest. That'd be weird. You know, so it's like, it's this weird thing, and I don't know what else to say about it other than it's stupid. And I'm sure that a version of Madam Web could have been good. Not necessarily my pitch, which is just remake the Terminator, but make it Madam Web. But like, for all we know, the original draft for this could have been okay. I have a little faith in that, mostly because like the two guys who wrote it were also responsible for like a lot of clunkers over the years. Gods of Egypt and Morbius come to mind. But okay, like clearly if they're still getting work, they have to at least understand a 3-act structure. And parts of this movie are genuinely interesting, but so much of it either through their work or studio mandates, like we'll never know, but somewhere down the line, this movie fell apart. At the end of the day, I do feel kind of bad for the people. Like, kind of bad isn't the right way to say it. I feel as though a lot of us are hyperbolizing Madam Web. A lot of people are going to say it's the worst movie they've seen this year. And it might be so far, but the year is young, and I don't think it's that incompetent. It is incompetent. It's very incompetent. But I don't think it's quite as bad as people make it out to be. I think that through our, perhaps like our collective fatigue towards comic book movies, or just, I don't know, a case of people not liking the idea for the movie, maybe even just on paper. Like, I think a lot of us are kind of blowing this out of proportion. Madam Web it's offensive insofar that like it could have been better and it was a clearly mismanaged movie from the start. Everybody was pretty miscast in this movie. Like, Adam Scott aside, I can't think of a single performance in this movie that I liked. I think Dakota Johnson, like, I think she grows into the role of Madam Web by like the end of the movie. But for the rest of the film, she was like flat. She was so dull. She did not want to be there, and she made it known on every time the camera cut to her, you could tell she didn't want to be there. I've watched a bunch of clips leading up to the release of this movie just through the natural osmosis of the internet and all of its algorithms and junk, and I swear to you, she has never once seemed remotely interested in being in this movie.
This isn't really a spoiler for the film, but Cassie dies. Cassie's dead for 3 minutes in the film. Do you remember that?
I was like, he does? I haven't seen the movie.
Just this dry delivery to everything where you needed someone who could like emote more than she was willing to.
You have a winning personality. I guess I got yours by mistake.
You know the way like Nicole Kidman emotes in the AMC like pre-roll video that everyone watches when they're at the movies? It's like that.
Dazzling images on a huge silver screen. Sound that I can feel. Somehow, heartbreak feels good in a place like this.
Trying to save people who were running out of it. Until one moment changed everything.
She's like half reading it off a teleprompter maybe. Just didn't put in the time to learn her lines. Like, I don't know what it was, but something about it just is off. The only character who has any semblance of charisma was Adam Scott in this movie. And he has the most inconsequential part. Like, 100% you could have cut his character out of the movie and you would have had to change one scene. A single scene. Why put him in the movie then? other than IP, because like IP is king, right? It's so strange. I can't say I'm ever going to see this movie again. If I do, it'll be like on a flight somewhere maybe. Like, okay, yeah, I'm just going to put this on for background noise while I go to sleep. Maybe that's Sony's whole strategy. They don't care about if you enjoy the movie or not. They just want to keep their daily active users up on like people engaging with their media. So they're just making movies that put you to sleep. Because if you fall asleep in the first 20 minutes of a movie and you sleep through the night, it still counts as seeing the movie, right? Like Netflix will still count that. Or the rental on YouTube you made of this movie will count that. Maybe that's it. The Sony's just trying to create a universe of exceptionally boring superhero movies to put you to sleep. Well, if that's the case, mission accomplished. Anyway, there it is. There are my unformed, unconstructed, unorganized thoughts on Madam Web. If you've seen Madam Web and you feel like talking about it in the comments, feel free to drop a line or two. What do you think of the movie? Am I going a bit easy on it? Am I being really hard on it? I think I was openly critical of it, but I was also pretty clear that like, it also isn't that deep. You know, there are a lot worse movies out there, and I even enjoy some of them more than Madam Web. I don't know if that's something I said about Madam Web, but it was just boring. So much of it was a slow dirge to get through, and I would have rather it took some risks and just failed spectacularly as opposed to being a dud. Madam Web is a dud, and I would have just preferred like something that, I don't know, conviction goes a long way in a movie. Let's just leave it at that. Conviction goes a long way. I would have had it fail spectacularly because then it would have been a memorable failure. But nothing about this movie was particularly memorable. Anyway, that's it. That's the end of the video. So yeah, bye.